bin heute in Südengland, in Seaford, bei Derry Hannam, der im Bildungsbereich in England sehr, sehr viel bereits getan hat und dem Neuerungen unterschiedlichster Weise sehr am Herzen liegen. Derry, thank you very much for having us.
Pleasure.
Would you perhaps like to introduce you to our audience just with a few words?
Yeah. I was a teacher for a long time, for 20 years, from every sort of grade of teaching, from the lowest to, I suppose, the highest, head teacher. And then I was a school inspector for 15 years in the English school system. But all the while being very interested in young people having a say in how their classes ran, how the school ran, having some say in their own learning. And so when I finished with the officials, I began to work with democratic schools all around the world, show some interest in democratic school conferences. At the same time, in a kind of bridge position, I was working for the Council of Europe, developing a project known as Education for Democratic Citizenship, Human Rights Education, which is grounded in the sort of raison d'etre of the Council of Europe. And I've been described as a bridge person who links the independent, largely private democratic school movement around the world, though not everywhere. Some countries are actually funding democratic schools, and the state systems, as it were. Sometimes I get involved in court cases where state systems don't entirely understand what democratic schools are trying to do. I've got a few of those running right now.
Right. So, if I asked you, what were your own experiences as a child in the education system? What helped you to develop self-confidence, to explore your own gifts and talents?
Very little. Apart from perhaps the most useful things were I remember fairly relentless battles with school going back till I was quite young. I remember thinking when I was about 7, walking home, why on earth isn't the school in the least bit interested in what I'm interested in?
Oh dear.
I'm expected to show great interest in what they want me to be interested in, but nobody ever bothers to find out what I'm interested in. I remember one early victory was when I was 11 and we'd just taken the examination to decide whether we went to a gymnasium or a Hauptschule in English, a grammar school or a secondary modern school. And we were allowed for 1 hour on Friday afternoon to read books that we chose from the class library. Well, the class library was unbelievably boring. So I asked the teacher if instead of just reading books from the class library, we could bring books from home to read. And she said, yes, as long as they're not comics. Well, my main interest was the Royal Navy in the Second World War. So I brought a mighty book called Jane's Book of Fighting Ships with me to school that I could hardly carry. And I learnt the calibre of every ship's gun on every ship, from the sort of smallest minesweeper to the biggest battleship. And I became a total expert in ship's armaments. The teacher wasn't terribly interested, but I think she was quite impressed by the book I was reading. But then in secondary school, no, almost nothing. All I really remember enjoying of secondary school is I joined the Air Force cadets and learned to fly a little plane. Well, that was very exciting, but that was about it from secondary school. The rest was pure tedium.
Oh dear. So what, in your opinion, would have helped you, would have supported you to have the confidence to really develop your own ideas, your own whatever, explore things? What would have helped you?
I think the biggest thing missing in regular school is time. And it's got steadily worse, so that every minute of school time is filled with prescribed activity. The teachers have virtually no choice. The curriculum comes down from on high. All this is especially true in England. It's less true in the Nordic countries, where the national curriculums are more outline, guideline documents. But in England, almost every minute of the day is prescribed. And then the system wants to take control of the kids' time when they go home by giving them 2 hours homework. A school last week in England said children should revise for their GCSEs for at least 3.5 hours a night. Well, you've got how many hours in school plus home, nothing else in kids' lives but study. So we shouldn't be surprised at the rising levels of mental ill health in young people, the rising levels of obesity, because there's no time for kids to go out and do anything active. So what I missed most was some time that I could call my own, where I could take an interest in something and then expect an adult to take some interest in it too, to share my interest, talk it over with me, maybe give me some ideas of where I could go next, not impose them on me, but just throw out some suggestions and leave it to me whether I accepted them or not. I always craved that kind of relationship with adults. And later in my life I did find it, and that was one of the things I think that helped me become a democratic educator.
Yeah. What was it? I mean, where did you find that, what you had been craving for?
Well, I found groups of people who were interested in the same things that I was interested in. And it's very hard to pursue an interest as an individual. I mean, I've always been impressed by the psychologist, developmental psychologist Jerome Bruner, who identifies 3 qualities that he calls supremely human. One is curiosity. Well, I've got plenty of that, though school did its best to kill it off, I would say. Collaboration, that we're social animals. We like to do things together, to share ideas together. That, again, is pretty much shut down in school, where you're expected to learn on your own, do your own homework, get your own grade in the test, for example. So curiosity, collaboration, and another one that will come to me in a couple of minutes. 3 C's. So
what made you become a teacher?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I was several other things. I trained as a valuation surveyor before I became a teacher, and I worked for a while in a group therapy unit for adolescents in a psychiatric hospital. That was extremely interesting. And I remember thinking, if it's okay to have a psychiatric hospital for young people where the staff and the patients were on first-name terms, where the staff didn't wear white coats, where the emphasis was on talking, where the community lived together in a democratic way, that decisions about how this therapeutic community should run were made by the collective. Every new patient or every new member of staff, in a sense, was equal. In fact, it was quite funny, because sometimes medical students from Oxford University would come and they'd be told to hang up their white coats in the staff office. And the first comment usually was, but we can't tell who are the staff and who are the patients. So I thought, well, that didn't say much for their diagnostic skills, as most of them were training to be psychiatrists. But being in this therapeutic community made me feel, well, I'm not a medic. I don't really want to do 8 years of training. How can I work in this kind of environment? And I thought, well, really, schools should be like this. So I started training as a teacher. I very soon came into a certain amount of conflict with the authorities on the teacher training course, especially psychology, when we were told to learn about Pavlov and his salivating dogs, Skinner and his rats. And I remember saying to the psychology lecturer, excuse me, I want to work with kids. I don't really want to teach dogs or rats. And so we came to a kind of deal where I created my own psychology course. I was a little bit older than some of the students, and he was fed up with me asking endless questions that sort of put him on the spot. So we did a deal. I would no longer interrupt his lectures. On the other hand, I would be allowed to go to the library and create my own psychology course. And I went to the library and I found shelves of dusty books that were never read by people like A.S. Neil, Homer Lane, Tolstoy, John Dewey. And I was very fortunate in my first jobs. I thought, either it'll work or I'll get fired. I didn't get fired. It was a bit like the army. If you're incompetent in the army, they promote you because it's so hard to get rid of people. And it was a bit like that for me. I tried out my methods, and instead of being responsible for one class, suddenly I was responsible for 8 classes.
Wow.
The next thing, I got headhunted by a new school up the road. I was made head of humanities with a staff of 12. And then I went to another school as a deputy head, etc., etc. These were the early 70s, and I think it was an unusual time. It was a time of innovation, and a very exciting time to come into teaching. So what I discovered in every teaching job I had was that these methods worked. If you listened to young people, you gave them time and space to generate their own ideas, their own enthusiasms. The capacity of humans for learning is fantastic.
Absolutely.
And you need to create an environment that lets it rip and encourages it instead of shutting it down with prescribed curriculum and tests. So I found it worked. And that was very encouraging.
Didn't you still find it difficult as a teacher that the school gives only space for certain talents of people, whilst the human being, I mean, we have so many different talents and gifts that we very often can't imagine.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think new talents and gifts will arise.
Well, I was very fortunate in my first job. I was given a group of 36 11-year-olds who just failed the 11 plus examination, so they were doomed to the non-university route through secondary school. It was a fairly middle-class area, so a significant proportion of the parents really cared about this and regarded it as a catastrophe. The children themselves felt they'd let their parents down, so it was a double catastrophe. The head teacher said, I want your class to be sort of halfway between the one teacher, one class of the primary school and the 11 teachers, 11 subjects of the secondary school. He said, I'm going to put you responsible for English, history, geography, social studies and religious education. So that covered about 62 or 3% of the kids' timetable, enough to really develop a relationship.
And not follow lessons, single lessons.
No, and to have space to develop things. Yeah. Now the head said to me, I want you to try some integrated work. Now the heads of the departments whose lessons I was going to teach weren't happy about that, so they gave me distinct lesson plans and teaching targets for each of the subjects. I knew I'd got the support of the head teacher, so I threw them away, basically. And I remember the first day the new class came into this classroom. It was a big class, but it was a reasonably big classroom. And I'd already got the chairs in a circle, which they'd never seen before, so they didn't know where to sit. But eventually they sat down, and to their surprise, I just sat in the circle too. And I had a book in my hand, and I said, look, I've got the book, so I'm going to talk until I give the book to somebody else, and then they can talk. And then if somebody else wants to talk, put your hand up, and the person who's got the book will give it to somebody else. So we started, and I explained to them, I told them my name, I did something forbidden in secondary schools, I told them my first name, and said it was okay to use it as long as other teachers weren't around. And in exchange, I wanted to learn their first names. And then I explained to them what we were going to study in my class. And I said, history is everything that's happened in the past, geography is everything that happens in different parts of the world, social studies is the way people live together in groups, religious education is what people believe, and English is how we communicate. And one very sharp kid called Stephen put his hand up and said, Derry, does that mean we can study anything? So I said, well, yes, more or less, doesn't it? What doesn't fit into those 5 subjects? If you can think of somebody said science. And I said, well, you will be doing science with a separate teacher, but I don't mind a bit if you do something scientific on one condition. I was rather hoping that when you'd studied things you were interested in, you would tell the whole class about it. So I'd be very grateful if, as part of English, you would communicate to the rest of us with pictures or write on the blackboard or whatever, anything that you're interested in studying. Wow, they said. And off we went. I said, you can study in groups or you can study on your own. Mostly it was groups, but we had a few sort of eccentric individuals who came up with some topic that nobody else was interested in, like the history of iron struts in coal mining in the 12th century or something like that. They'd be on their own. But on the whole, we had groups and it was fantastic. We had a wedding dress group and I encouraged them. They said, oh, can my mum come in and talk to the class? I said, absolutely. When you do your presentation on wedding dresses, if your mum makes wedding dresses and she wants, absolutely. So I had adults continually coming into the classroom, which caused me some problems with the head teacher. Anyway, it took off. It was absolutely wonderful. The enthusiasm of the kids, the self-confidence of the kids grew. I began to get phone calls from parents saying, what are you doing with my kid? He's never wanted to go to school in his life before. Now he's staying up half the night writing haikus or something. So I said, oh, fantastic. Do you set haikus for homework? I said, absolutely not. He's discovered these 3-line poems and he loves them. And he just writes them one after the other. Anyway, and then I began to get parents phoning the head teacher saying, we've heard about Derry Hannam's class. Can you please switch my kid into Derry Hannam's class?
Because they like to.
Well, this was fantastic for my relationship with the head. And he had to say no because I'd already got 36, for God's sake, in my class. Anyway, we went from strength to strength, and I said to the head, look, I'd like to take these kids through for another year. So he agreed. So I had another year with them.
Wow.
And it got better and better, but some really funny things happened. For example, one of the rules for teachers was that classes must be supervised at all times. Well, very quickly we created class laws, and they very quickly needed a class court in order to enforce them. And one of the laws was if the class got too noisy and 5 people put their left hands up, then the class would have to have 4 minutes silence. And there was an elected timekeeper with a good watch. I remember her, Wendy, she was a swimmer and she'd won this lovely watch in a swimming gala. So she was elected timekeeper because she'd got the best watch in the class. And if 5 hands went up, there was it was her job to say 5 minutes or 4 minutes. Sometimes it was 3 minutes, but the point of it was the class would make itself go quiet for a period of time. The funny thing was, I thought that if they whispered, which is what happened, people started whispering, I thought that was fine because I could still think, but they didn't. No, they thought it was shocking and that we're not having whispering. If we got 5 minutes silence, we're having silence, not whispering. So if anyone whispered, they had their name put in the book. And if they got put in the book 5 times, they'd come before the court on Friday afternoon. And so it developed. You know what kids are like. Give them this kind of scope, they love it. They invented rule after rule. Anyway, one day the head brought some visiting teachers to my classroom, and I was in the library helping someone find out something, breaking the school rule for teachers. And the head brought about 5 visiting teachers into the class, and it was silent. And the teachers looked around, where's the teacher? And he looked around saying, this bloody Derry Hannam's not in his classroom again. And eventually the head teacher said, one of the visitors said, why is it so quiet in here? Where's the teacher? At this point, the chair of the class meeting, a boy called Andrew, stood up and said, well, we have our own laws here, and we're having a quiet time. And then he said, and you know, our teacher, Mr. Hannam, is so, what was this word for it? So soft that if we didn't have our own government, it would be chaos in here. At which the visiting teachers had a laugh. I'd reappeared by this time, and the head said to me, "Where were you? You're supposed to be supervising the class." And I said to him, "It is supervised." And I said, "They're supervised themselves." And he thought that was a bit iffy. Anyway, the really funny sequel to this story is 42 years later, I'm sitting in my study writing a book about this class. And on my computer appeared this bald-headed guy, about 50, and he said, "You won't remember me, but I remember you. I found you on Google." He says, "You're still up to your old tricks." And I said, "Who are you?" And he smiled and said, "I'm Andrew from 1H. And I thought, my God, you are too. He said, "I'm head of a primary school in Welwyn Garden City, and we run it as a democracy, and I'm training other head teachers in how to make their schools more democratic." I said to him, "You won't believe this, Andrew, but I am actually writing about you." And this is the boy who said, if we didn't have our class government, it would be chaos in here because Mr. Hannam's a bit soft. And he said, "Oh, I do." He said, "I remember saying it." He said, "I could poke my eye out. I'm so embarrassed. I remember saying that." But there were a whole string of other events that this boy and his friends were involved in were beautiful, but I don't have time to tell you about them all.
Yeah. But what I think about this story is it means a lot of inner strength to be able to give the kids the freedom to grow to their own strength and force. Because if we exert our strength and don't let them discover their own strength, it'll be very difficult for them.
But do you think teachers now, 80% of teachers in England want to be out of the job within the next 2 years. 75% of them say they are so stressed as to be on the verge of being clinically depressed and not sleep. Do you think teachers want to teach in this prescribed, hateful, test-ridden system? Of course they don't.
I mean, some perhaps, but...
They came into teaching to do what I did. They came into teaching to watch kids' excitement to learn and them grow as people. It's outrageous what we're doing to kids. It's equally outrageous what we're doing to teachers.
Absolutely.
So I don't agree with you. I think most teachers would love to work in an open and democratic way if only they didn't have the government breathing down their necks.
And if they weren't so afraid of making mistakes themselves.
Well, maybe. But if you talk to teachers, there's nothing more exciting. I think you've been one. There's nothing more exciting than watch a kid's interests take off.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
When from being sort of, I don't know what to do, to, wow, let me get at it.
Yeah, they get alive.
Absolutely.
They get alive, they're full of creativity, and everybody can learn at the same time.
And that'll do for Bruner's third C, creativity, curiosity, collaboration and creativity.
Yeah.
These are the key to being a human being, and we suppress them.
Absolutely.
And I think this is very serious for the future. And I think our school systems are absolutely up the creek as far as helping people prepare for the kind of society we've got coming in the future, where work is no longer going to be available in sufficient quantity for people to use it to base their identity upon. They're going to have lots of free time and they're not going to know how to use it. They'll have not learned to find these inner resources and inner interests and inner creativities. They're going to be broke and destitute if we don't do something about the inequalities of wealth that are developing. They're going to be attracted to demagogues, if we're not very careful, who will blame some group, Jews or blacks or Indians or Welsh or Irish. Some group will be to blame for this social insecurity and instability. Or we develop in school a deep and profound respect for making decisions as groups, for democracy, for respecting difference, for respecting diversity.
Yeah.
That means every day in school, kids should be making democratic decisions and learning about human rights and respecting the rights and diversities of other people.
And be allowed to have the joy of discovering themselves.
Absolutely. So there's two aspects to this, and I would say we in the democratic school movement are doing it and are providing a model, and it's about time that public school systems woke up and looked to us. What do? We have schools that encourage kids to find their own interests, and we give them time to pursue them as far as they want to pursue them in a context of democratic collective decision making and respecting the rights of others, learning about human rights. So it seems to me our school systems have very rapidly got to change from being oppressive places where kids' views are not taken at all seriously, where there's no freedom to express them, and if they do, nobody listens to them. We've got to change to become places where kids' views are treated with respect, where they have some power to affect decision making, and they have the space and the time to find and develop their own enthusiasms.
Absolutely.
And the job of the teacher is to help them if they can. But on the whole, I don't think kids need much help. If they've been in a regular school system where they've never been able to find their own interests, then what they need is some detox time.
Yeah.
They need some time when they're left alone to find their own way, perhaps with a little bit of encouragement and chatting to adults, but certainly no prescribed curriculum.
So they can sort of learn, I am allowed to be who I am. I don't have to function in a way that somebody expects from me, and I'm not wrong if I don't fulfill expectations of others.
No.
I am my own totally unique individual being, and I have my own individual, absolutely unique talents and gifts, and they are a gift for the world.
Yes,
because
agreed.
then we can feel this self-confidence.
And then, of course, if you have a job with very low hours, or no job at all, but you've got your universal basic minimum wage, you can then feel confident to give your talents to the world, whether you're paid or not.
Yeah.
And in fact, we've got to start to prepare for thinking about a world where there is not enough paid work for everybody, and for some, maybe, there won't be any paid work. And it seems to me that the alternative to a universal basic income is social collapse.
Yeah.
If we go on as we are, with the rich getting richer, living in gated communities, thousands of people homeless living on the street, and these polarities get worse and worse, we're not going to have any increase in the number of very wealthy people, because the ones we've got will be accumulating more and more.
Yeah.
The increase is going to be in homelessness and dissatisfied, jobless people, or people on very low paid work. So unless we provide some kind of social framework, some social cushion to support the lives of everybody, and this is where I argue for the universal basic wage, we are going to have social breakdown.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree entirely with you. And yeah, I think we've come now to around sort of, how do you say it in English? We've now sort of, I can't say it in English. Wir haben jetzt einen großen Bogen geschlagen. What I would like to add, I think you probably agree, if we allow people to follow their own intuition, their own desire to explore the world in their way and find their own talents and gifts, nothing is more fulfilling than being able to do what you really like, what you're really good at, and to give it to the world. Then we really feel worth being.
Exactly. And to prepare young people to be able to do that, we need what we can already see happening in the democratic schools.
Yes.
The answer is ecological collapse. The alternative is ecological, environmental collapse and social collapse.
Yeah.
And presumably nobody in their right minds, even the richest of the rich, want to see that happen.
Exactly. So would you have an idea what would you find the most important piece of advice out of your own experiences? What would you say to parents who haven't gotten democratic school in their environment? What can they do to help their child, to encourage that child, or to help it to develop their strength?
Three things. One is support a political party that does not advocate the rigid regimes with the endless testing that we've got now. First of all, at the political level, let's get rid of that. Take an interest in your school, get to know the teachers, show them that you would support innovation and exploration, not be afraid of it and complaining to the head if they tried it. The last thing would be obviously to start your own school, to get together with some other people, even if you start by pulling your kid out of school, which of course home education in England thankfully is still legal. Form a school out of a group of home educated families perhaps. Also, I thought of a fourth one. Be prepared to resist what the current system is doing. If your kids are 11 and are about to experience a week of SAT testing, take your kids to the park for those days. Don't let them near the school. What you'll find is some head teachers will actually wink and support you. Other head teachers will try and fine you 60 quid. I suppose then I would say carry on resisting and don't pay it, because enough of you don't pay it, there'll be no prison to put you all in.
Exactly, yeah. And would there be something, something very short and precise you would advise to teachers?
Yes, I feel that teachers need something like the medical profession's Hippocratic oath. Doctors, before they go into practice, declare that they will never knowingly harm a patient. Well, I think there should be a teacher's equivalent which says, I will never knowingly harm a child. If they did that, they would be unable to engage in this testing madness and this prescribed curriculum madness. And if enough of them said, I'm not doing it, you're asking me to break my Socratic oath or what, Aristotelian oath or whatever it might be called, then the government wouldn't be able to get away with it.
Yeah. So get together, don't fight for yourself. Get together, find the support. As a group, you can always achieve far more.
Yeah, collaboration, curiosity, creativity.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Derry.
That was a pleasure.
Really a pleasure.
Thank you. Vielen Dank.